Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Creative Concourse. I'm Chinyere Okafor, the chair of the Department of Women's Ethnicity and Intersectional Studies. Jay Price is the chair of the Department of History. He's going to chair this panel. Thank you. Jay, over to you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be part of this conversation. Just as a quick reminder, because this is a Zoom-based conversation, do mute yourself if you're not speaking, and if you do wish to ask a question or have a comment at the end of our panel, please feel free to do so by unmuting or by typing a question in the chat, and we'll address these questions as we can. I'm pleased today to chair a panel with Dr. Chinyere Okafor, the Chair of Women's Ethnicity and Intersectional Studies. Janice West, also going by Taleba Bint Rayford, who is a cognitive behavioral and therapist, joining us remotely from Chicago. We have Dr. Marche Fleming Randall, Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer here at Wichita State, and Dr. Jean Griffith with the Department of English. And so with that, I will turn our conversation over to you, Chinyere, to begin our discussion on intersectionality everywhere.
Intersectionality, horizontally and vertically. The term intersectionality was coined by a legal scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw, and documented in an article on the marginalization of Black women in feminist theory and in anti-racist politics. Since that time, the term has moved beyond legal studies and feminist studies to mainstream politics. The main purpose of my presentation today is to initiate a conversation about the term intersectionality through the department that focuses on women's and ethnicity studies. As chair of the Department of Women's Ethnicity and Intersectional Studies, WISE, I think that it is necessary to engage the term intersectionality and its place here at Wichita State University. By the way, the theme of this conference is intersectionality at Wichita State University. So what is intersectionality? Mathematically, two parallel lines cannot meet. But if one is running vertically and the other horizontally, they will meet at a junction. That's the intersection. However, human experiences are not like parallel lines. There are multiple interlocking lines, junctions, and spaces. When I was thinking about this summit theme on intersectionality, I wanted to represent it visually. So I drew a maze of colors meeting, joining, and crossing each other. So this was what I drew, and I'm sure some of you might have seen it in some of the information and flyers. One dimension, class, you can see it, it runs from west, women and gender shooting out, race and ethnicity pouring in from the south, ability and disability, filling out, sexuality coming from the east, and all of them running into each other like a web in a complex entity, not like parallel lines. The field of women's studies focuses on women's lives and experiences and their intersection with hierarchies of power and power relations. And those power relations are like race, class, ethnicity, sexuality, disability, and so on. I here will again refer to Crenshaw's example of one court case. That's it, the Grunfried versus General Motors. It's a case of 5 Black women that took the company to court for discrimination. The Black women were not employed, 5 of them. They were not employed by 1964. During the recession of the 70s, the company used seniority layoff system to cut off those with least number of years in the company. So the Black women lost their jobs. They went to court to argue that their layoff was discriminatory because the cutoff year was 1964, when the company had not employed them. Okay, remember that Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 makes it illegal for an employer to discriminate against you based on your sex, race, color, religion, or national origin. All of them were operating under the same law. The company would argue that before 1964, it employed women, but the women would say all the women were white. The company would also argue that before 1964, it employed Black people, and the women would say all the Black people were men. So where were the Black women? In court, there was no law to adjudicate the combination of discrimination based on 2 axes of power. So the women lost their case. Actually, their case was thrown out because it was not based on a single axis of power, such as race or sex, but on the intersection of sex and race. Intersectionality denotes the combination of overlapping power hierarchies and relations of power in human processes, identities, and structures. Non-white, LGBTQ, and poor women, as well as women with disabilities, to name a few, have identities that we should not subject to single axis analysis because their experiences intersect with multiple axes and relations of power. They have intersecting identities that impact how they are viewed, understood, and treated. They undergo specific forms of discrimination that individuals whose identities center on mainstream axis do not. Single axis feminist analysis based on unitary concept of women cannot adequately theorize the experience of these combination of multiple hierarchies. Intersectional feminist analysis is a complex ontology based on the combination of multiple hierarchies. And it is most suited for analysis because it includes all, both the mono and multiple. It includes everybody in that approach to analysis. How can we recognize intersectionality? Our eyes have been so trained to see things in blocks. When we talk about women, we see women as women, all women. They all the same experience, everything. But no, how can we train ourselves? It begins from self. We can look inwards into our own personality. We will recognize some intersectionality within ourselves. Even empowering intersections, those empowering intersections, if we have open mind, whether they're empowering or disempowering, will help us to recognize the complexity of another person. So whether marginal or mainstream that we embody, we can use that combination to look at other people. It is helpful, very helpful in seeing other people in complex terms, not as one-dimensional beings. It's very important because we live in a system with processes, policies, and structures vectored through monodirectional lens. The goal is to make the system more intersectional, and we can achieve this through intersectional lenses, not only by individuals like ourselves, but by those who make the policies and run the system. But we have to understand intersectionality in order to help each other and help everybody to understand it, including those that run the system. For WSU, all should understand the meaning and value of intersectionality. Diversity and intersectionality should inform our teaching pedagogy, policies, and implementation. Many of our students have intersectional subjectivities, so WSU should aim at matching that with faculty that they meet in the classroom. With WSU, how can faculty teaching incorporate and reflect intersectionality? This is a challenge because intersectionality is not part of our training. So, more in-house training for faculty, not just for faculty. We must develop our views to engage the processes and structures that maintain our mono system. Putting good policies on paper is important because that's a reference. But we are also talking about implementation, training faculty, administrators, and our students to understand and implement customs and practices that foster intersectionality. My ideas are not just coming from me, but from research and from what I share with the students in my classes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that good grounding in our discussion today. Our next presenter, Janice, will read a poem, Redbone, an intersectional poem. Please go ahead.
Thank you everybody for being here today and understanding that I am a teacher and I'm in a school and it's about to be loud, and so I'm going to another room where it will not be. You hear the children coming back from their lunch hour. All right, the title of my poem today is Redbone. Just getting up every day and being who I am is a revolutionary act. And just because you are unaware of it doesn't change that fact. It may seem inconvenient or seem irrelevant to life. Maybe it doesn't matter to you if I deal with this strife. But be aware that this revolutionary act, although you don't see, has the ability to impact everything that encounters me. I get a microaggression for seeming too Black. I get sometimes ignored because I'm a little too fat. I have a lady on the plane who tries to move away because of my scarf, and oh, she did see me pray. I get to deal with colorism, and this from both sides, because some Black peeps feel sus because of my hide. On the other hand, some groups that I know show me a nod that does not make me glow. You see, they think, wow, she's okay. She's lighter than me. And they don't understand why this just makes me flee. They act so surprised when I'm not trying to fit in and don't relish the privilege that comes with light skin. More respect goes to teachers I see, despite they don't care or take care in the same way as me. But their charms on alarm for their supremacy. They try to pinpoint who they say that I am. They get so confused, it's really a sham. Don't try to figure me out. Put me in your box. dissect my deep thoughts, unlock all my locks. Just see that I will be all that I plan, all that I need, conscious expand. And just so that we all can be clear, let me simply ask, what is your fear? Why do you need to put me inside a marginal box in where I must hide and only come out when you need me to be a status, a quota, or token to see? But when I reflect upon my own truth, observe what is there, inspect like a sleuth, what I realize is I am the one who must determine what will be done for my life. And I will take the full responsibility for all of this bull, because that is what the spiritual has freed me to know. It is about my response, not the hate that they show. And if others cut me off at the crossroads of intersectionality, that is absolutely what I will not. Won't shortchange myself. I have just one shot to be the best version of my true self, to show up for me, take me off the shelf, wear my grand pride like a true queen's gold crown, determine my own adjectives, adverbs, and pronouns. I can't set up a tent at a crossroads that's bare, where opportunity isn't quite fair. When you fall between the two needed slots, and neither requirement do you have nor you've got. Instead, I'll create, birth, reshape, create from so little as I scratch and I scrape. And many of us feel the heat of the breath of those who chuckle and predict our death. But never shall we relent. The cabins repainted, the money's all spent. Remember when you see others like me, she is truly your sis star, although you can't see. Embrace her and love her because she is you. There is only one. There's no such thing as two. In light and in love, I share these small words, hoping that someday our plight will be heard. Will you be the one who begins to share and helps others to become more aware? I hope you will join us as we seek to be free from the shackles of intersectionality. Dalu, shukrani, gracias, arigato, grazie, merci, dhanyavad, and thank you.
Thank you so much for a really powerful poem that captures so much. A real privilege to hear this today. To continue that conversation, we now go to Dr. Marche Fleming Randall. The struggle is real, from GED to PhD.
Y'all saw my bird fly? Yeah.
Yes.
Indeed. All right. So the struggle is real, from a GED to a PhD. And I think it's important for us to know that women have always been in the struggle. It's always been a glass ceiling. And if you're a woman of color, it's been a glass ceiling plus a tent and another glass ceiling in between us and them, as we put it. And I'd like to say, starting off, that say life is like a box of chocolates. When life gives you a lemon, you're supposed to make lemonade. Don't worry, be happy. We have all heard these sayings before, but does they really make you feel better as a woman of color? No, but only if you're thirsty and if you're hungry enough that this is a good idea for you to continue your education. And a lot of people get stopped because someone told them that they're not worthy to move on, or that you won't get a job, you're not educated enough to have the position that you're in, and so on and so forth. Meet a triple threat, which is me, Black, woman, and a PhD. That has always been my problem throughout my last 15 years of having a doctorate and working in a higher ed education setting. That's also been the problem for other women who had to deal with this. But I'm here to tell you today, continue to be a threat, continue to make people uncomfortable in their seatings, because that's what we got to do in order to move the needle for women across the board to be recognized and be organized in the higher ed. Is this your current situation in your department where you got, or even in your groups as students, you got somebody in the group that does 99% of the work, which is always in our predicament is in my office is always me with the 99%. You got somebody in your group that has no idea what's going on the whole time, but they get a check and come to work, says they're going to help, but then they don't. And then you got one that disappeared at the very beginning and doesn't show back up to the very end. So when I see this picture, and I always keep this up in my office because it reminds me that I have to work for everybody else. In order for us to have equality, somebody's got to take the helm and take the wheel and do what's right. But this is real in many circumstances. You have people that I don't always work, but when they do, they prefer to take credit for other people's work and write themselves in for an award. That's what always happens in the situation when there's women in positions that are doing the job. That has happened to me several times, and that's why I'm able to speak freely about it and be transparent about it. You know, in the academic world, they call it plagiarism. In the real world, they just call it realism, okay? Here's the part here. I'm not afraid of losing. I'm actually afraid of having the wrong people around me while I'm winning. When you're a woman, you got to be careful about who you have around you. You don't know if that's a friend or a foe. You don't know if that person is really up to the standards of academic integrity. We always been put on the spot all the time. If you don't look like other folks and don't remind them that they are in the privileged section, so to speak, you will end up having staffing issues like this right here. Can I get a witness on this? How many times have women been thrown under the bus for something? It's always been a part of the workforce. And even in classroom situation, somebody's willing to throw you under the bus and drive over you with the bus to keep themselves safe. In our area over here, you have to be very careful because as a woman of color, and I did not mention, and I think if you want to, you could Google, I'm the first African-American female in 126 years to be a vice president at this institution, which is a predominantly white institution. Is that saying a lot for Wichita State at this point, that it took 126 years to get a person of color in an administrative role, and that is a woman? Workload. It's not the load that breaks you down, it's the way you carry it. Women, we carry a lot of stress, we carry a lot of mental health, we carry a lot of things that we're not able to express only on those sides that sometimes men don't have to express it, but women, they can see it through our face, through our behavior and what we do. But I leave you with something that I like to say, you know, you need 3 bones in this life. And to be a woman of color, these are the things that have worked for me. You need a wishbone, a funny bone, and a backbone. A wishbone to wish those away from you who are not in your best interest. A funny bone to laugh at them when they're not in the right. And a backbone to stand up for injustice and stand up for equality and to stand up for diversity. So those 3 bones are very important in life and also in your work and professional. How do I keep from struggling? My emotions won't take over. Well, don't let them take over. I purposely had that slide quickly because we are not here to make excuses of being women. We're here to validate of being a woman of color. Do you have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marche. And you really put that personal set of intersectionality into a really relevant way of how it looks on the ground. Turn it over now to Dr. Jean Griffith from the Department of English. Feminazis do exist, women in the alt-right.
This is a lot different and a lot more sinister than what we've heard before. So sorry about that, but this is what I do, so I'm doing it. For those of you who don't understand the term feminazi in my title, back around, I don't know, say 1995, it used to be a way for mostly men to discredit women who made pro-feminist arguments, like women should make the same as men for the same job. Oh, she's a feminazi. I mean it more literally because I'm talking about women in the alt-right, or some historians prefer the term white nationalists. So I'm going to talk to you about 6 facts about the alt-right. And hopefully we'll be able to recognize there's a spectrum of these kinds of ideologies. And this is, I'm going to be addressing the most sinister version, but hopefully it will teach us all to look for it in more palatable, but no less acceptable or no more acceptable ways. Women represent about 20% of the alt-right, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when I talk about some of the other things that are hallmarks of the alt-right, make that number seem significant in terms of that many. So that's the first thing. The second thing is white women join the alt-right for the same reasons that white men do. And those reasons, surprisingly enough, don't have to do with the fact that they already harbor particularly virulently racist ideology. And in fact, a lot of them do it because they're down on their luck. They're looking for community. They're looking for relationships. Some of them get into it to save relationships with people who are already in it, et cetera. So it shows that while people go into hate groups for other reasons beside hate is something that is so accessible to people in power. And that's kind of the lesson that I want you to take away from that. Third, a lot of historians talk about the way these events take place and the layering that is necessary to sustain this community in terms of event building. So they talk a lot about how there's always a picnic before a cross burning. And this is a journalist who studies the alt-right. This is a quote by her. Why is it important that there's a picnic before a cross burning? Women create the space for those public events for the men to do the more outward looking jobs. Another photojournalist who has published on the alt-right, this is from her. If we're only addressing public violence, we are not addressing white supremacy. White supremacy is also that picnic. That's the whole point. When we look at this tip of the iceberg, the people out there beating each other with clubs, that is such a small percentage of the damage that white supremacy does. Also, so many things go into that one act of public violence. So many hateful picnics, end quote. Fact 4, women occupy a space between the alt-right that is markedly paradoxical. White women have benefited from their position of power, even when they have a secondary position to men. So to say that even when they have less power in a system because of their gender, they have benefited overwhelmingly because of their race. Women have, across the course of American history, fought quite hard and violently to protect that power. Women are lured into the movement on the promise that they'll find their place. Once they do join, though, they are tightly controlled. And this next quote is from a woman named Samantha that is featured in season 1 of the Southern Poverty Law Center's Sounds Like Hate podcast. Samantha left the alt-right, but she was at one point the women's leader of the group Identity Europa. Quote, you couldn't go to any parties unless you had a boyfriend or unless you were associated to a specific man in there. And in order to do that, you had to date someone in there. And when you dated a man in there, whatever he said went. And then she continues, referring to the violence that was often directed towards these women. I never watched a woman get raped, but I know that they were. Fact 5, it's really hard to leave. Speaking of her mother, Samantha said, I really and truly in that moment, and that's she's addressing when she decided to leave, did not know if I would ever live to see her again. But I do know that I wasn't going to die in white supremacy. I wasn't going to die on the wrong side. She obviously did leave. She had to change her name and her phone number and move around quite often. But she did claim eventually she was able to reclaim her identity at some point. Fact 6, and this is the last one. The movement fancies itself a culture, but experts see it as a cult. As I said, I took information from the podcast Sounds Like Hate. I also used Sayward Darby's book, Sisters in Hate, which I highly recommend. That's it.
Very powerful conversation. Thank you, Jean. Now we have an opportunity to have a conversation with Dr. Okafor with Janice, with Dr. Fleming Randall and Dr. Griffith. Dr. Gordon, please.
I loved all the presentations. Jean, there are some parallels in my own paper around conservative women. And I think what your paper brings up for me, which I think is really important, is being a woman or being recognized or seen as a woman doesn't determine what your politics are going to be. In between identity and knowledge of the world are a whole bunch of filters, right? There's language, there's ideology, there's a whole bunch of things. And because, sometimes what you'll get is the argument, well, if women are involved in it, then it must be okay. It must be automatically feminist, when that's just not the case.
Right. I've been thinking about the argument that civil rights aren't pie, and if I get my civil rights, you don't get any less. And of course, there's lots of valid reasons why that's true. But part of the reason that the argument persists is because it's a little bit right. In other words, if my good opinion of myself rests on a poor opinion of you, any claim to your equality is going to be perceived as a threat, right? And so, I think that comes into play for women as much as it does for men.
Lavandria wishes to speak. Please go ahead.
This is to Dr. Fleming. I just wanted to tell you how inspiring hearing your testimony, I call it testimony, was, because it's just, man, it's amazing. And some of the quotes or some of the things you basically said about it's not how heavy the load is, it's it's how you carry it. I definitely, man, I can relate. I just appreciate hearing that. It made me feel empowered, because I'm a single mother of 4, and I'm working on my bachelor's, and I'm pushing forward to, I'm going to try to go for my master's.
Other thoughts or observations from the group?
I have a question.
Please go ahead, Christine.
And this is for Dr. Griffin. Do you think, with the climate that we're in now as it pertains to female misogyny, could this group or this ideology that you're speaking of be partly responsible for what we're seeing as it relates to women? Women being able to connect, women being able to work together, regardless of Black or white. I'm just speaking of women in general.
I think I'm glad you asked that. That has always hindered all women from moving forward. They have, white women in particular, and in particular bourgeois white women, have always kind of allowed ourselves to feel special and not to join causes with other women. And so I wouldn't even say at this moment, I would say throughout American history, that has been the case. What is interesting, and this is kind of doesn't seem to relate, but perhaps it does, I don't know, to your question. All of my sources date back to 2017. And that is when the women in these white nationalist groups, that's the attention they got was almost exclusively in the year 2017. And I can't actually explain that. But it does beg the question, where did these people go? Where are they now? And are they still active? But just, the irony is that the kicking them off of mainstream social media platforms obviously was a good idea in many ways, but they've become harder to monitor now. But how do we get that information about them so that we can be wary of people? Because they do still exist to a certain extent. And even on our campus, we've heard them sort of pop up in the student body here and there, right?
Dr. Fleming Randall, please, you remind me of those 3 B's because I'm going to be needing them to be referring to them.
Wishbone, funny bone, and backbone.
Backbone, okay, thank you. Intersectionality is discussed as if it is just about minorities, LGBTQ, disability, and all that. But for intersectionality to work, all must be involved. And that's why I like the fact that Dr. Griffin brought in that angle. We need to understand what is going on there and understand what is going on across, vertically and horizontally. So that's what intersectionality is about, so that we know how to be dealing with the issues. But if we know about only one side, it's not that one side that controls the system that make the policies. And this also factors into Ms. West's presentation of that wonderful personal poem, A Beautiful Self, but some people find it too light. Some people find it too dark, too tall, too short. So this intersectional conversation, I really applaud you all for your presentations, and thank you for coming to the intersection from different angles, and we are meeting at this junction.
Thank you for that comment. And I believe Deborah Gordon has a comment.
Some of all the women were white, all the men were black, but some of us were brave, was also true for women who were involved in what was at one time, goes under various names, the Chicano movement, various the Brown Berets. There were women involved in those organizations in the 60s. In addition, I'm thinking of the book, This Bridge Called My Back, which is kind of like a foundational text, at least in my training for this category, women of color. I think that part of why this seems new to us is that in women's studies is that I think the textbook industry has gotten a hold of our history and told the story of the history of the women's movement in the United States in particular ways. So one of the things intersectionality, I think, ideally does is it makes us go back in time and revise our sense of history too, so that we see that what we value now was also going on at an earlier time, that it didn't just sort of spring forth.
With that observation, I think this is a way of drawing our panel today to a close. This has been a really thoughtful, engaging conversation. I'm so glad I've been part of this opportunity to think about this more. So a big round of applause to all of our speakers today. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chinyere, for really bringing this to the fore. This is a testament to what you do. And so with that, I'll let people have a few minutes break and then enjoy the next session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Price.
Dr. J. Price, thank you very much. We really appreciate your excellent sharing of this panel. Thank you. Women's ethnicity and intersectional studies has so many friends of wise from across the campus. And we're going to see more of them, in the evening. So thank you all for being our friends.
The history department is rock stars over there.
Yeah.